Welcome and thank you to Maslow, everyone. Y kami listening ng podcast siya. Welcome to the Pacific Peoples Partnership bi-weekly podcast for the week of January 23rd, 2017. My name is Siobhan Powlowski, and I'm the Deputy Director of Pacific Peoples Partnership. This week, PPP's board member and renowned curator Carol Myers sat down to interview Dr. Andrew Moutu, Director of the Papua New Guinea National Museum and Art Gallery. The interview is an exploration of contemporary Papua New Guinea art, specifically an ongoing exhibit at the UBC Museum of Anthropology focused on the art of the Sepik region. The exhibit is called In the Footprints of the Crocodile Man, Contemporary Art of the Sepik River. This exhibit will be closing on January 31st.
Andrew Moutu, who's the director of the National Museum and Art Gallery in Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. And Andrew is here as an invited guest for the opening of the exhibition In the Footprint of the Crocodile Man, contemporary art from the Sepik River in Papua New Guinea. And I guess we can take a number of avenues. This exhibition is perhaps different to others that you've seen recently, and I just wonder what your impression was.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to come here to Vancouver and participate in the exhibition opening, and even to come over here to Victoria and to be energized with encounters I've had this morning, inspired. The Sepik River, especially the middle Sepik part of Papua New Guinea, is well known for its sort of proliferation of artistic works. They are known for many years. And much of what goes on, especially in currently, sometimes gets underrepresented, perhaps misplaced, perhaps relegated to irrelevance, perhaps unimportant, and that kind of thing. And you find a lot of museums, especially in Europe and in some parts of Australia, for instance, privileging antiquated, fossilized, pieces that are considered, original, authentic art, and they seem to bear no connection to the lives of ordinary people on the Sepik River as they now live it. Yes, of course, they continue to produce pieces, but they are not considered original, if you like. Yeah. They say, you hear people talking about it. Oh, they should go back to museums and old photographs, and this is the way people have done things. You people now, you've deviated. You've gone away from, and you find that commentary often. And in the last 6 months or so, we've seen, two important art exhibitions on art from the Sepik River, but again, mostly concerned with, very old pieces, and which would sell for a lot of money on the art market. And what we find in this exhibition is rather different, and it does two things. It works on very simple people trying to make a living based on what they can make out of their hands and ideas that are sometimes drawn from a body of mythological origins, and sometimes appropriating the conveniences of an exegesis of new kinds of experiences. So you will find someone carving an image of a cat, which is not usual to find on the sepulchre. You will find someone making carving an image of bird of paradise or a motorized dinghy, canoe. And these are things that people, they constantly appropriate new experiences, and they incorporate them into their repertoire of creative expression. Mm-hmm. And they constantly do that, and they celebrate this. And this is, they are not limited by a kind of mythological template or a blueprint that dictates to them what they express. They constantly look for fresh moments to find and express that. Yeah, so that's one thing. But this focus on contemporary art allows simple people, artists, women, young men, young women, to say something. They also use art as a means of earning money. This is the kind of money that they can use to support their families, support their children to go to school, and so on. And so, any kind of collection that would put money into the hands of local people is well valued. It's highly valued, and I think we're putting money into appropriate places to support life, to support creativity even. That's the important thing in the first instance. And perhaps going forward, the kinds of concerns that you find people saying, that goes to the relationship between art and environment. Of course, we draw materials. We use dyes, we use bark material from trees to make our strings that we make bilums or bags. We use wood. We use, dye from trees to make paint, for instance. And that raises questions about, are we still going to do these things in the future if we have the threat of a huge mine coming on in the headwaters above where we live? And so these are the questions that people are asking themselves. And what this exhibition does is it uses contemporary art forms to raise questions about very serious questions about our environmental and cultural future. And it does so very simply, yet eloquently and powerfully. And I was humbled and, in fact, moved by the message and the gravity of the message in particular. So I take my hat off for my colleague Carol, who in this undertaking was quite ambitious to tell a local story, at the same time used technology to try and evoke and also bring into sort of concurrence people's voices, people's emotions.
Thank you to Dr. Moutu for sharing his insight into contemporary art in Papua New Guinea. Next up, we have an introduction to our newest board member, Chris Porter.
My name is Chris Porter, and I grew up in the Fraser Valley in Mission and moved to Victoria during high school and fell in love with the ocean and the wildlife here, and was fortunate to spend 6 months in Alert Bay working in a church in the native reservation there, where I first became involved with orcas and fell in love with the legacy and the story of them as a natural legend of the native people there. And found myself ending up working at Sealand of the Pacific with Tilikum the killer whale, and I proceeded to travel the world working in the captive aquarium industry, hoping to educate the public to preserve our oceans through the display of these animals. And ended up 10 years in the South Pacific in the Solomon Islands working with dolphin hunters there that use dolphins for their teeth and their meat for currency and barter trade, and spent time working with them and conserving dolphins there, and ended up back in Victoria as I found out we have only 78 remaining southern resident killer whales, and after traveling the world believed that Canada and especially BC can do so much more, and embarked on Ocean Walls, and I deliver shows to schools or shopping centers or public events, bringing the wild through technology instead of captivity. And so we use 50 nonprofits, footages, and individuals from the public to showcase the wild with digital footage instead of the actual animal. It was a Pacific People's Partnership I always followed for years once I learned that there was a Canadian organization that cared about the South Pacific. South Pacific's very far away, and when you're there it's hard to see any ties to Canada. So I was excited to find an organization that supported the Pacific peoples, because they do really have a small voice and have such a huge area of conservation to look after and huge area of the oceans to look after. And I think for an organization of Canada to lead the way to establish some ties that can give them a voice on the international circuit, as well as support their voice down in their small projects, because they are very sustainable down there. They've lived there for hundreds of thousands of years very easily. But this transition period into the modern world needs a little more tools and understanding, and I think that's the importance of Pacific Peoples, is blending that message all over from Victoria all the way down to Solomon Islands and beyond. Living in the Solomon Islands, I learned a lot about community and the importance of how people in those regions work together, and despite there's lots of warring tribes and differences of opinions, the sense of community is so important, and they operate with consensus, which is such a foreign thought to many of us, but once you get used to the culture and the utilization of consensus, you see the benefit of it, and you see the importance of listening to everyone and making sure everyone's looked after within the community. So that was the biggest understanding of their culture that I gained, and of course some diverse expansion of understandings, working with tribes that killed dolphins for their teeth and used these teeth as currency. So there's a lot of intricate aspects that you learn by living in the South Pacific about community and commerce, and even just our influence as white settlers around the world through Britain and that. And I was always amazed at how much they knew about Canada down in the South Pacific, and knew about the Social Credit Party here in Canada and the amount of infrastructure that we build up for our country. And there's so much more that Canada can do down in that region to help work with them, and at the same time learn something from them to enrich our own communities here in Canada. So we ended up removing over 60 animals from our waters here in British Columbia in the Salish Sea in the 60s and 70s, and now the population's down to 78 animals, and mostly based on lack of Chinook salmon. It's a food preference that they prefer, And we do have transient killer whales that eat seals and sea lions, and they're doing quite well. And we have a northern resident pod and an offshore group of killer whales. But this 78 is the last group that lives in pods, in 3 different pods in our area, and they use this truly as a residence. And they come together to hunt, they come together to mate, and they really are the clans and tribes of the sea, in my opinion. And so it's very important for us to work to understand their routes and their needs so that we can prepare for it, because BC without orcas is pretty sad BC. I hope to achieve with Pacific Peoples Partnership that we establish these connections of these cetaceans with the peoples, because a lot of these people have a huge connection with these animals, whether it be the natives here in Canada or the people of Solomon Island that respect these animals and use them as part of their day-to-day living. And I think there's a huge opportunity to learn a lot more about conservation and protection and the utilization of animals, and what is the importance of preserving them or conserving them or displaying them, and how best to display them, and how best to blend the cultural needs and the physical needs of livelihoods with the conservation values that we need to preserve in our oceans for our children, or we're not going to have oceans left for them if we don't look after them better. The most difficult thing with Canadians in my work is our lack of wealth, I say. Is we're so spoiled and bettered that we almost feel that there's a fear to change in case we lose it. And when you spend time in the South Pacific and other parts of the world, you realize just the simple aspect of surviving is important, and these people are surviving day to day from subsistence hunting or other aspects. So when you try to bring that type of conservation discussion to Canada, it's very difficult when everyone's on their busy mode to Starbucks and the next appointment at 7 and that, and and you're like, okay, the whales don't have an extra day here, they're like, well, can we schedule them? And well, we can't schedule them, right? And so that's what I always enjoyed about the South Pacific meetings. Were based on importance and listening to everything when it was important, not scheduling it to be important. But I think a lot of intercultural people are entering Canada and really opening people's eyes of, wow, we do have a beautiful place and we should look after it better and we should appreciate better by offering our support to outside people by setting examples. And so I think once BC starts setting more examples for the world, then we'll have some hope.
Thanks to Chris for being part of our show. To find out more about us, check out pacificpeoplespartnership.org. If you would like to donate, please visit pacificpeoplespartnership.org/donate. If you would like to contribute to our podcast, please send Maddie an email at communications@pacificpeoplespartnership.org. Stay tuned over the coming weeks. We will be further developing our podcast and exploring issues relevant to Pacific Islanders. See you in 2 weeks for our next podcast.